Hey, it's Paul here from the Off the Comma podcast. And if you've been following the podcast, you already know that it's about amazing human beings sharing amazing stories about their experience with being stuck and getting unstuck. And you've probably wondered, hey, whatever happened to that guest? What's happened since they were on the show? So that's what this is all about. We are checking in with various podcast guests and just taking 15 minutes to see what's going on in their world. So deeper connection, learning more about our guests, seeing how life unfolds for them. Enjoy this conversation, and we'll see you on the next one. And I'm so excited to do these podcast guest check-in interviews because it's always cool to check back in with folks who have been on the podcast and see what they've been up to since their episode aired. And there's always usually something exciting going on. So this interview is no exception. So for this interview, we're checking back in with Janey Lee Grace. She was on episode 43 of the podcast. And Janey, hey, we kind of do this freestyle. So welcome. Thanks for popping back on for another interview. And what have you been up to and what have you been doing since you were on the podcast?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for inviting me back, Paul. I appreciate it. Yeah, I've been incredibly busy doing all of the stuff that I was talking about on the podcast, obviously running the Sober Club and still doing the Sober Coach training stuff, of course. But then in addition to that, I've written my memoir. I'm sure I mentioned it on the podcast, but it's now finally out. In fact, I've actually got the first copy. So that's super exciting. And the book comes out in October. And I'm planning a whole bunch of dates around the UK. So it's starting to feel real now. I went through a whole phase of it feeling kind of, well, I do feel nervous about it. I have to be honest. I do actually feel very nervous about it because it's, it's a thing when you're literally revealing your life. It's different if you're writing a non-fiction book. I've written lots of non-fiction books which are, about sobriety or about natural health and well-being, and that's easy. That comes naturally to me. But this is a little bit different because, it's very personal, obviously.
Yeah. Well, and Janey, you're known as an author. You've written books, as you said. So just for the purposes of this interview and for folks who haven't seen your episode yet, tell us again, remind us the title of the book and tell us what made you write it. What was your motivation?
Yeah, so the book is called From Wham to Woo, A Life on the Mic. And the book really is it's a memoir which documents my dim and distant past as a backing singer. I was a backing singer for Wham, as the title says, on all of their tours. Lots of other famous pop stars as well. I had my own top 10 hit, Some Ways to Love with Cola Boy. And then, of course, went into radio and worked on Virgin Radio and BBC London, and then with Steve Wright in the Afternoon for 24 years. So there's a lot of media stuff there, and along the way, lots of fun stories. And a publisher actually asked me whether I would consider writing a memoir. And at first I said, no, I really won't actually, because, I'm not mega famous or anything. And I've got this thing with memoirs. Do people really want to read that stuff? And I had this perception that if I was going to write a memoir, people would only be interested if I was dishing the dirt on someone, if I was going to be writing some really controversial stuff. And I said to the publisher, I'm not going to be doing that. I'm definitely not going to be writing anything nasty. So if you're looking for kind of controversy and for me to dish the dirt on George Michael, well, there isn't any, and I won't be doing it. But she said, no, not at all. I'm genuinely interested, and I'm guessing there actually are some really fun stories. And then I realised, actually, yeah, there are loads of fantastic stories that I share at dinner parties that are funny and entertaining, and I figured there are lots of people who are maybe not quite as old as me, but get in there who do fondly remember the 80s and 90s, because they were fantastic years in terms of the music biz, for sure.
Absolutely.
And also lots of Steve Wright fans, and there's lots in the book about my years at radio too. So I figured, you know what, I'll just shove it all in a book and see what happens.
Nice. I love it. And it's so funny because, our story, I came through your sober coach training in
Yeah.
London a little over a year ago, and I remember you mentioning that you had a stint working with Wham as a backup singer. It's just so interesting how the world works because I grew up in the '80s and I entered my teen years in the '80s. And, prior to that, I had only ever heard my brother's music growing up, and that was '70s kind of '70s rock and that sort of thing. Wham and others, Duran Duran, Madonna, Prince, those were my music. Those were
Yeah.
the ones that like these are mine and nobody else's. And Wham in particular, right? And so it's just so wild to first of all hear that you've worked with Wham.
Mm.
All of their songs have meaning for me. I just watched that documentary that Netflix put out,
Yeah,
I
it's
think
brilliant, wasn't it? It was
recently.
so
It
well
was
done.
great. And then you talking about doing the memoir. It's really cool. And I just
Yeah.
love how anybody who is talking about Wham, it's always coming from an angle of respect and not from dish. So,
Totally, yeah. And then of course obviously in the book I share all of that, and I share the Radio 2 years, and then bring it right up to date, hence the woo in the title.
mhm.
As you know, in more recent years obviously I've worked in holistic health and well-being, and spirituality, and all of that. But you'll be interested to know that, a little bit of a spoiler alert here, that the when we came up with the title, um, I was sort of thinking, yeah, I love that, from Wham to Woo, A Life on the Mic. That really fits really well. And it was around that time that I did one of those profiling things. You know how you do these personality profiles? There's things like Myers-Briggs and Enneagram,
Yeah.
and I did a Clifton Strengths one with a colleague of ours, Sally. And Sally did this Clifton Strengths. It's done run by the people who do the Gallup poll, so really
Mhm.
quite formal actually. And they look at what your strengths are so that you can, grow and develop, particularly in business. Anyway, I got the results through, and my number one strength, like off the scale, it said woo. And I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, what? Why would Clifton Strengths, run by Gallup, know that I'm really spiritual and into all things woo? And then, of course, I realised they don't mean that at all. What they mean by woo is winning others over. And that's my
Mhm.
top skill. And I thought, that's hilarious. It's actually hilarious. It makes the title even better because, being passionate about winning others over, I'll take that. I'll absolutely
Yeah.
take that. So it's double meaning.
I love it. I love it. And I'm very familiar with the Clifton Strengths
Yeah,
work,
of
and
course.
Woo is the one that always, because of kind of how at least our societies here in the U.S. and the U.K. there's so much overlap, right? Now we operate like Woo is not something that's generally celebrated. Like the people who have Woo or are strong in Woo are kind of seen a certain way over here, and there's a little bit of kind of like awe and like wonder about those folks, but oh, those folks don't do well in corporate America, or those folks don't do well in the workplace. And that's not true at all, right? We all
Mm,
have our strengths, and our strengths
totally.
all kind of come together to form a whole, but each of us has to do our part. And
Yeah,
I
exactly
would
that.
say not a surprise to me. Like that's one thing. If somebody said, "What would you say about Janey?" I'm like, Janie's power is showing up and inspiring others. Don't
Yeah.
ask her to write memos. That's not what she
Yeah, exactly
does.
that. Yeah.
So I have a question for you, and
Yeah.
obviously, these interviews are shorter, but we've still got some time. As you look at this book that you've now given birth to and put into the world, what are you proudest of, or what are you most excited about for this book in particular?
Yeah, it's such a good question actually, because as I was writing the book, I realized, there are some themes for sure running through my life. And I think probably the overriding thing that comes through is my absolute determination to go after what I know that I really want,
Mm,
even against the odds, because my background wasn't, and nothing was handed to me, nothing at all. But I had a kind of a tenacity, if you like, that when I look back, I realize that's what got me through. And there's a bunch of stories in the book that share that's how I got certain places. I don't call it luck. I don't think it is luck. I think it's about setting intentions, even though probably back then when I was a kid, I didn't know that's what I was doing, but I absolutely was. I absolutely was visualizing what I wanted and setting intentions and finding a way to manifest, again, a word I wouldn't have used then, but now I do, to manifest an opportunity, and then absolutely going for it, and doing that with, hopefully a bit of vulnerability and playfulness. Otherwise you just push a cow, right? So
Mm.
I think that probably is what comes through. And at the end, I have a little section in the book, which is my 12 rules for life. And one of them is obviously something along the lines of, if you really want something, go after it. Don't let anybody sit on your dreams. Go
Mm.
after it, because if it's important to you, you probably will be able to find a way to make it happen.
Ah, I love that. I love that. It definitely it holds true to what I know about you and what I've been inspired about, or how you have inspired me. All of these things, and it also kind of reinforces the fact that, like, man, when you're at a certain point in your life and you're kind of trying to figure yourself out or where you want to go or whatever, the look back can be so powerful, right? Like, there's
Yeah.
been times in my life where I've gone back and found old journals, and it's like, oh, I used to think that way even back then. Or, oh my gosh,
Mm,
I used words that I didn't realize I was even using 20 years ago. And it's such a
yeah.
great thing to share with others, like when they're trying to figure certain things out. It's like, do the look back, right? Look back. What's always been there, what's always been true, whether you knew it or not.
Totally. And I think another really interesting thing that I realized was that fairly early on, I understood the power of kind of writing down what you want. Call it cosmic ordering, call it whatever you like. But I did write a list of what I actually wanted, and I tell everyone to do this because chances are, when you really write down exactly what you want in detail, chances are you might fall a bit short of what you aimed for. But better that than nothing at all, right? And
Yeah.
and then when I wrote a list a long time ago, and some years later when I look back at it, even though the stuff on that list had been quite wild, really, considering I was, and really have very much going for me. But I'd written on that list that I would be a presenter on national radio. Of course, I meant Radio One at the time. That I would be supporting. That I would go on tour as a singer songwriter, and a whole bunch of other things. And they all came true. Every single one of them came true. Not in exactly the way I'd probably had in mind, because I ended up at Virgin Radio, never mind, national station. I did a tour. Okay, it was only with a relatively small artist, but so what? So the point I'm making is, I think when you really want something, when you manifest it, that something about the energy changes, and it enables it to feel like it might be possible for you.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And there's so many metaphors that we can use, right? But so many of them involve weapons too, like loading the gun or knocking the arrow.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's like the intention to make something, right? A recipe. It's like it starts sometimes with pulling the recipe card or looking it up, and then of course
Mm,
writing down the shopping list, the list of
yeah.
ingredients. Once you have those ingredients in the house, the odds of you not actually making that recipe is slim. So
Yeah.
Janey, thank you for sharing. And as far as the book is concerned, obviously people are going to be interested and want to buy it. We'll put the link in the description, since this is going to be on YouTube. There won't really be show notes; it'll be in the
hmm
description. But
hmm
why don't you just tell us quickly where everybody can find the book?
Yeah, so it's called From Wham to Woo, A Life on the Mic. It's published October 20th, I think. And it should be everywhere, certainly Amazon and wherever. There'll be an audiobook version as well. So, yeah, hopefully you can get it wherever you are. And if you are in the UK, whole bunch of bookshop dates in October and November. And I'm hoping people will come along and bring their memorabilia and daft t-shirts and daft pictures of 80s hair.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to have your social handles in the description here, so you'll be posting about your bookstore
Yeah,
tour and the
sure,
dates and so forth.
absolutely. Yeah,
Wonderful.
definitely. Yeah, it'd be great
Wonderful.
to meet some guys.
Yeah, Janie, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
coming back in and sharing with us and telling us what you've been up to. And boy, you really are up to some exciting things. I'm looking forward to the book myself. The audiobook, is it narrated by you?
It will be. Yes, absolutely.
That is,
Yeah, of
that's the
course.
one I want. I don't think the story is going to be the same unless we can hear it in your voice. So.
Yeah.
Janey, thank you
Cool.
very
Thank you. I
much.
appreciate it.
And for everybody who's watching this and maybe didn't see Janey's episode, again, episode 43 on the Off the Comma podcast. And obviously, Janey, you and I will be talking again on and on and on. So have a
Cool.
wonderful rest of your week.
And you. See you later.